here. My name is Tara. I lead design and ventures at IDEO CoLab. And it's been pretty amazing to hear from the speakers we've had today talking about technical and protocol developments. And now I'd love to turn our attention to the people on the other end of the funnel, so users. So I'd love to start with a brief story of another technology that emerged from the start of the early, of the early 19th century. I think it's, where you go? Okay. So speaking of technology. So I'd love to start with some inspiration of another technology that emerged in the early 19th century, the bicycle. So I went down in a little bit of a wiki wormhole a couple of weeks ago, looking into the invention of the bicycle. And what really drew me to this story was that the bicycle was a form that didn't just emerge from the mind of one single inventor, but rather it was a product that was evolved over time and prototypes over several decades from contributions and patents from various designers, engineers, inventors to get us to pretty much the shape that we had today. If you look at this on the left, one of the very first iterations and prototypes was this hobby horse, which had no pedals. It meant that the rider had to sit on top of the frame and sort of take big strides and to pull themselves along. As you can tell, this wasn't super efficient, and it wasn't taken very seriously. Eventually, someone invented the idea of pedals, which they actually attached to the front wheel. And this meant that the rider had to sort of balance on top of the bicycle as if it was a unicycle. And if you ever have ridden a unicycle on top of cobblestone streets, you'd be able to tell that it wasn't a very comfortable ride and gave it its nickname, the Bone Shaker. Very, very shortly after, you can see the number of prototypes that happened. People tried making the front wheel as big as possible to see if they could cover more distances faster and further. It was only in 1879, about 60 years after the very first prototype of the hobby horse, that an inventor called Lawson came up with this idea of the bicycle chain. And this meant that power from the pedals could be transferred to the drive wheel, making the entire bicycle just a lot more efficient. A few years later, someone added on the idea of pneumatic tires, which meant that it made for a much, much smoother ride. And this iteration that we see here, that was made in 1888, is pretty close to the enduring form of the bicycle that we recognize and use today, about 120 years later. Like with all technology, even the bicycle had its own hype cycle. So these are actual press quotes from the New York Post and Washington Times. When it first started, they said that bikes were a passing fad for music hall types, AKA hipsters. At its all-time highs, they said that bicycling is the next national sport before plunging into despair in a couple years saying that the wheel was doomed. And finally, in 1906, saying that cycling was dead. They were very certain about this. Obviously, as we know now, that just wasn't true. Over time, in various prototypes, bikes just got better. They got better wheels and sturdier frames. Roads just got smoother over time, which meant that riding was easier. And as we can see, bicycles just proved not to be a passing fad. So coming back to why we're here today, as we're standing in this midst of this Cambrian explosion of prototypes and iterations, where are we in the evolution of the decentralized web? Are we here? Are we closer to here, maybe? When do we get to this? It's harder to tell than we know. User adoption is harder to track than we think on the decentralized web. I think there's been a lot of debate on what metrics to use, from measuring on-chain transactions to daily active addresses to transaction volumes. There's one thing that we seem to be able to agree on is that these metrics are set to change in a not so distant future, with more off-chain transactions expected with layer 2 or application-specific metrics. So how do we exactly track adoption? Even so, in a general sense, compared to Web 2.0, we're still an order of magnitude behind. If we just a quick glance of comparing applications across payments, browser downloads, or chat apps, it's pretty clear that we have some catching up to do. And we have to approach this and overcome this through multiple ways. Some of the top challenges that we're seeking to overcome include, first of all, the number of just real-world use cases and applications that encourage the adoption of the ecosystem, technical developments like scaling and protocol improvements. Regulatory climate is definitely a deterrent and makes sort of onboarding mainstream users a little bit more uncomfortable. And last but not least, we have to improve user experience so we can bring more users and more mainstream users on board. So the last reason is one of the main reasons why I'm standing here today talking to y'all and why I continue to champion design in this space. I'm not being extra, I promise. This is why. See, without users, this vision that we're building towards, a web with greater transparency, with greater accountability, with greater inclusion, it remains a utopian vision. For true systemic change to take place, we need to bring on a much larger community along with us, one that spans beyond the biddlers and hodlers in this room. We need to onboard the world. And I believe that design, and good design in all senses of the word, is just a tool that we can use to get us there. So how hard is it today to access the decentralized ecosystem? I did a fairly quick UX audit of what it would take a crypto newbie to create a CDP on Maker. And it took me around 40 steps, from downloading a MetaMask wallet, creating a wallet, to acquiring crypto, to finally creating the CDP. And while things can be a little quicker with experiments like InstaDApp, it was still a fairly lengthy process for me that was instinctive only to insiders. And it got me thinking, if it takes an expert, or if only a small minority of users can access these wonderful dapps and services that we're building, then we're not creating a decentralized system or an open one. We're then merely recreating very similar power structures that we already have in the traditional financial system we have today. So I think, thankfully, this does not seem to be the intention. Doing a quick survey of UX experiments and best practices in this space made me a lot more optimistic about how we can make this easier for users in a not-so-distant future. To start, I wanted to go over really quickly some of the best experiments we've seen covering these 3 major steps to onboard a crypto newbie into the ecosystem. First, the act of creating a wallet. Secondly, acquiring crypto. And the third, performing a transaction with it. So let's dive in. Even after, it's been 10 years since Bitcoin, and still this is one of the main challenges that a crypto newbie would face. The seed phrase experience is still such a gnarly one, with having to write down the seed words, storing it somewhere, trying to freak out about not losing it, trying not to take a photo of it and uploading it into the cloud. Good news is, I think there's just a lot of experiments here, from seedless smart wallets to sort of gamifying the seed storage experience. For example, if you look at this MetaMask flow, I love how they're sort of prompting the user to arrange the words in a certain order. They're making this almost like a game. And I can kind of see this going into another stage where it's a little bit more goal-based or earning badges when the user actually unlocks certain security requirements. This sort of badge earning mechanism can be used for progressive ownership of a wallet account. So for instance, a wallet with less than, say, 1 ETH might only nudge a user to store their keys if their balance goes over a certain threshold. So this makes onboarding just a lot more seamless for a new user who might just want to play around or just have a little bit of sort of dust money in their account. But it gives advanced users just much more ownership options. Another great design pattern that I think was mentioned by Lane early this morning are universal logins and meta transactions, which are currently sort of experimented with and implemented in some seedless smart contract wallets or smart wallets. These use the universal login flow to enable seamless onboarding across different devices and different applications. It automatically creates an ENS username for any user, which feels like email. It's not super unfamiliar. It's easy to remember. And the keys are stored locally or with backup codes across multiple devices. This is an example or flow from Argent Wallet, which is something that's, I think, on mainnet right now pretty closely. But what they enable is that they sort of were inspired by the universal login flow and created this concept of a guardian that you can appoint to sort of do social account recovery. As you can see, these guardians can be friends, families, it could be other hardware devices. The flow is intuitive, even though the idea of appointing guardians isn't something super familiar. It's pretty user-friendly and easy to grasp. So I'm pretty excited about this project. Check it out. So the next hurdle for a crypto newbie is acquiring crypto. While Coinbase and other sort of exchanges have a pretty decent banking and payment integration experience, I find what is the most intimidating is identity verification and compliance flows. So to have empathy for the user, we suggest using some best practices. So for example, gradual verification flows, which means asking only for the bare minimum of information for each type of activity until a user's action triggers requests for more information. There are also really great compliance APIs like Cognito and Coinbase and Wire, which work on really creating very seamless onboarding flows. And there are really great experiments there. I won't say it's the sexiest subject, but I think that's something to improve upon. So apart from buying crypto, you can also earn it. Gitcoin or Coinbase Earn are great platforms that allow people to earn in crypto. And I wonder how we can get even more freelancer sites to facilitate or allow payments in crypto. Finally, the third major hurdle for a crypto newbie is making a transaction, and we're pretty close. This is the gnarliest one, but the last step. And I think we're at this stage where we can take very small steps to make this experience go a much longer way. Firstly, to start, dear developer friends, please use human-readable addresses and transaction amounts. Instead of that crazy long list, a long string of sort of letters and numbers, maybe use ENS or something like that, which gives the user a human-readable name. That long string of characters is harder to read and even harder to type. Another thing that's pretty easy to do is to reduce the transaction amount to something with maximum 3 decimal places or so. I know that it's a really great feature of digital cash to be able to request crazy amounts like this, but it just causes so much more mental energy for the user to be able to sort of calibrate and understand it. Even with just those 2 simple steps, we can sort of reclaim so much more visual real estate and just make this look so much less intimidating for any user. QR codes, in my opinion, should just be hidden unless called upon. They're a little bit like fairy godmother or something. It's a little bit more secure this way, too. So gas is a concept that we've touched on all day. I know it was a hot topic 2018. I'm hoping that it will soon be abstracted away. I love the concept of meta transactions, which some people talked about today, where you wrap a transaction in a transaction, which means that smart contracts or your dApp could cover a user's gas. Most of us here have multiple devices and use them to browse the web. And I love this demo from Wallet Connect, which is an open protocol for connecting desktop dApps to your mobile wallets. This means that the user gets to verify payments through sort of biometrics like Face ID. And this is user behavior that's already pretty familiar. And what I love about Wallet Connect is its potential for portability. It works for desktop dApps, but could be very easily translated to sort of physical retail payments in crypto. Last but not least, waiting for transactions is a nerve-wracking process. The ability to check Etherscan should be a bonus and not a requirement. A nice design mechanism that I think we could try is the idea of a progressive reveal. So if you see the little demo of the screen on the right, tapping on a notification reveals additional information that we can pull from, say, Etherscan But otherwise, that is just collapsed and invisible to the user. So that's a nice little reveal that we can sort of integrate with notifications. So here we are. The user is onboarded. What keeps me fairly optimistic is that with the number of projects and experiments that we've kind of looked at today and seen so far, we're getting so much closer to an easy, intuitive experience to onboard a user onto the decentralized web. Looking back at the 40 steps it took me, or a crypto newbie, to create a CDP on Maker, I found that if we integrated some of the key design patterns like universal logins or meta transactions, we actually cut the number of steps down to 10, from 40 to 10. Imagine that, being able to access a decentralized peer-to-peer financial service in under 10 steps. Now that is a hugely powerful and revolutionary thing. So here's the ask. As we make strides towards a decentralized world with millions and billions of users, let's do some of this stuff. First, let's talk to them, gain empathy. Whether you're a protocol designer or network developer or security engineer, I think we all have a hand in designing the best user experience. Imagine them integrating this into their daily lives. What would make this easier? Secondly, collaborate with designers and other people from other disciplines. Yes, we wear a lot of black and sometimes we talk funny, but designers are great translators. What they're able to do is to take concepts and be able to amplify them to a greater number of users and a greater number of applications. So think of them as amplifiers and work with them that way. And last but not least, let's build a Web3 design system together. I think there are a couple of experiments here around building a Web3 design system, but they haven't gotten super far. And what I've realized is that in doing this UX audit, that all these different projects are happening all over the world. And this is something that we have to build together collaboratively in order to design a bicycle that we would want to ride in 100 years. Thank you.